Hey, what's going on? John Sin here with a public service announcement slash 12 months to mastery module. And it's this: don't qualify yourself. Qualifying yourself, trying to impress women, making it obvious that you're trying to court her, win the girl over, is the quickest way to shooting yourself in the foot with any particular woman and women in general. Being try hard and qualifying yourself, constantly trying to impress her and have her have a more positive image of you, just leads to tooling yourself. But first, a dedication. This video is dedicated to all pickup gurus who teach this rule in their presentations, yet somehow brag about how much they get laid and how awesome they are within 5 minutes of meeting you. You know who you are. What it means to qualify yourself. By now, you should understand that qualification happens anytime someone tries to fix the image another person has of them. So if you approach a girl and she's just being neutral towards you and you start talking about how awesome you are, you're qualifying yourself. If you brag, you're qualifying yourself. If you try to impress the girl with your knowledge of foreign films or rare wines, you're qualifying yourself. In other words, anytime you try to convince someone you're awesome, you're qualifying yourself. So that's why we want to be subtle, and we never want to be seen to be actively trying to influence someone's opinion. When someone is obviously trying to get you to like them, obviously seeking rapport, obviously trying to show you that you and them are a match, people get really weirded out, because if it's obvious, it'll come out in the wash. If you are really similar, if you do have a lot in common, if there are a lot of natural chemistry things, they'll manifest themselves. You'll realize it as you're talking. You don't need to point it out. You don't need to qualify yourself and try to make it seem like you're the greatest person on earth, because often it just makes you seem like an asshole. And I say that as someone who used to qualify himself all the time. So let's jump directly into the 5 main ways guys qualify themselves. In general, guys will qualify themselves in one of these 5 different ways. You'll probably start to have some sort of emotional reaction as you're watching this right now, feeling the various different ways that you've qualified yourself in the past, or maybe still do. And we'll go through each of these one at a time. Number 1, explaining themselves. Guys are very logical. We like to explain. We don't like people to misunderstand. I think that's actually one of the reasons guys have trouble approaching women they're not super attracted to, because they have to explain to themselves they're not going to fuck them. Most of the time, you're not going to fuck the girl anyway, so you might as well just practice rather than explaining to yourself why it won't work. Why don't you just game her and see what happens and see what skills you can build. Number 2, bragging. This is pretty obvious, but you'd be amazed at how many guys still do it. Even guys that are sort of successful with women can sometimes blow themselves out by bragging too much. You don't want to seem like you're bragging. If you have awesome things about yourself, you should play them down rather than play them up. You should still bring them up, but don't keep talking about them and stuff like that. There's a difference. Number 3, overcompensating. This is a big one, especially with guys who have bad inner game, or who, believe that they're too short, too old, too fat, whatever. They overcompensate. They try to be bold instead of confident. They think that it's better to push things in people's faces and kind of smash them before they get smashed on. Not a good strategy. Number 4, trying too hard. Really putting a lot of effort into the interaction. Overly thought out responses. Searching for any little thing you guys have in common. Fishing. There's all sorts of things that go into trying too hard. And number 5, projecting an incongruent image that they think women will like. This is where you get your 5-foot Asian computer programmers who approach women and tell them that they saw them staring at their ass. Or you get, 40-year-old guys woohooing and slapping people 5 in loud nightclubs because they're trying to be 20-year-old club kids. when you project an incongruent image, you are automatically qualifying yourself. The girl automatically sees the gap. I like to call it the gap between who you are and who you're trying to pretend to be. Women have a lot of intuition, so it's not hard for them to figure things out. So, obviously, all these 5 are pretty big problems. Let's jump into them in a little more detail, and I'll give you some ways to avoid doing these things. Number 1, explaining yourself. The great John Wooden, basketball coach at UCLA, who won 10 straight national championships, once said, "Don't explain, don't complain." This is great advice for dealing with women. Don't explain yourself. Get out of the habit of logicking your way into success. In the real world, if you get in trouble at work and you can logically defend what you did, you win and you get out of trouble. When dealing with women, when you logically defend what you said, even if you have the best logic in the world, it's still just going to make it worse and make it seem like you're trying to qualify yourself and you're putting too much thought into this and you're really analytical and weird and insecure. If a woman doesn't like something you did or you feel insecure, don't go out of your way to explain yourself. As soon as you catch yourself explaining that you have better clothes at home, or you're really tired, or you don't usually meet girls, or any of these things, stop. Just stop. As soon as you hear the words coming out of your mouth, as soon as you hear "I don't usually," just stop the sentence. And when they say "you don't usually what?" you go, "You know what? I don't know why I was saying that." And then change the subject. Don't explain. Get out of the habit of explaining why you did things when women don't like what you're doing or when it's awkward. When it's awkward, don't explain why you're doing things or try to explain that something was a joke. That's another big explaining yourself. Don't say "just kidding" or "that was a joke," because it just is qualifying yourself. You're seeing, "Is it okay?" It's like you're a little kid and you're like, "Is that a joke okay? I'm just kidding. Don't do that. If she gets mad, apologize, but don't just say "just kidding" as a way to get out of saying things that are slightly rude. The big point with explaining yourself is that when you explain yourself, you make her the boss. You're qualifying yourself to her and making her the selector. You're making her decide, okay, is this explanation satisfactory? Fuck that. You don't need to do that. Don't explain yourself. Bragging. Okay, so I want to start this out by saying bragging is a double-edged sword because at some point you do have to show the girl why you're attractive. So we want to actually separate bragging from boasting. Bragging is sometimes something you have to do. Sometimes you have to tell girls you have $1 million company. Sometimes you have to tell girls you're a firefighter. Sometimes you have to tell girls you did first aid on a guy who got shot. There's a lot of things that build attraction that you have to talk about, but the key is you don't want to boast. Bragging is something that makes you look good, that is told in an otherwise acceptable story. When you're bragging, if you take the brag out of the story or out of the communication, it still is a good communication. It's still interesting. People would still be interested in hearing the story. When you're boasting, it's all about how great you are. For example, if I was boasting, I might say, yeah, my company is so amazing. I'm such a good businessman. Like, I've taken my company from $0 to $1 million in 3 years. That's just all about how great I am. If I was bragging, I might say something like, starting a business is really, really difficult. Like right now, we're now getting to the point where we have like 6-figure taxes owed and, like dealing with the government for large sums of money is really scary. It says the same thing, but it's not all about how great I am. You want to point out the bad parts of how great you are. Also, you want to brag subtly by using open loops and unanswered questions. So, for example, if I want to talk about, the car I just got, I might say, yeah, it's interesting. I just got an SUV, and it's so much different from my old car because I used to have like a sports car, and now I'm like up high. And the girl might go, oh, what kind of car did you got? And I go, oh, I just got a Range Rover. And now I can brag about how awesome my Range Rover is because the golden rule of bragging is it's not bragging if the girl asks you about it. If she says, what do you do? What kind of company is you? Why did you have to pay $100,000 in taxes? You can answer these questions, and it's not bragging. Same thing with open loops. I might say, yeah, my ex, she used to perform a lot, so we'd sometimes have to travel around the country. And she might say, what did she do? And I might say, oh, she was a singer. These little subtle things change bragging into something positive and into something where you won't get a reputation for being a braggart. There are guys who brag and just talk about how awesome they are, and they're real rich or real successful, and they get away with it. But you can't really brag about things that aren't really high level and going to be impressive to anyone. And you can't boast about them for sure. So try to keep it to bragging. Try to keep it subtle with open loops, unanswered questions, and try to get the girl to ask you about anything that will make you look better. Overcompensating. This is a very, very, very common thing guys do. When you overcompensate, you're attempting to make up for a perceived weakness by going overboard in the opposite direction. So if a guy's been a nice guy all his life, he might snap. I call it snapping. Like he one day just had like a psychotic rage and was like, fuck this, I'm not going to be a nice guy anymore. Now he might overcompensate and be too much of an asshole, I definitely did that. And then you've got to kind of swing back to neutral. Guys overcompensate for weakness, by adopting like an alpha male routine and becoming really rigid or like really, like hard ass. But again, you're just going to another bad stereotype. Or they overcompensate for being boring by becoming a routine machine, thinking that if they can just fill time, it'll substitute for them actually being an interesting person. So there's a lot of these things that happen, and only you can really answer if you're overcompensating. But generally, if you have a glaring insecurity, you tend to overcompensate. And for example, I used to be really, really insecure about not being quote-unquote cool. I wasn't popular in high school. I'd never really, had a huge group of friends where I was like the big social leader, like the prom king or anything. And for a long time, I thought that, girls of a certain quality of looks just wouldn't like me because I wasn't that typical cool person. So I used to overcompensate by basically pretending to be a celebrity. This was in my Mystery Method days, probably like 06, 07 maybe, 5 years ago. But that's what I would do, is I would pretend to be famous. I would pretend to be like a famous comedian, and I would talk about like how I dated models and blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, what happened was for a period of time, I had a lot of girls who would be really into me, but like feel like I was intimidating. They'd be like, you're too cool for me. And I'm like, whoa, how am I having this effect? And it would actually hurt me getting laid. They'd be like, yeah, I feel like, you don't have any weaknesses. Like, what's wrong with you? And because I was good at overcompensating, I actually made these girls feel bad, which is kind of an extreme, but definitely something to keep in mind. So you really want to watch and look, where are my insecurities causing me to overcompensate? Where do I think I'm weak, and how do I try to adjust for that without overdoing it? Next, trying too hard. Another way guys qualify themselves is through acting what we used to be called try hard. This was when I got into teaching in like 2004. This was the term that was thrown out there, try hard. He tries too hard. And guys who act try hard are generally putting way more effort, energy, and thought into the interaction than the woman is. That's how you can tell if you're try hard. If you've ever feel like you're treading water and you're throwing the bathroom sink at her and you've done everything and the girl's still lukewarm, you're trying too hard right now. And the problem with trying too hard is that socializing is not an area where sheer force of will or working harder always helps. It actually just makes you look more desperate, makes you look like you're trying to like put on this song and dance. Like then it was later called being a dancing monkey, being an entertainer. We call it validation-based game. There's all sorts of nasty names for trying too hard. But a lot of guys, especially guys who are very successful in the corporate world or very successful with computer programming, IT, stuff like that, in their lives, they can just put more effort and force of will into things, and it makes things better. You try really hard, you study really hard, you get better grades, but doesn't work with socializing. So when you can tell that you're putting too much effort into the interaction, stop and start trying to bait the girl. Stop giving everything away and start trying to make her work. And if she's not willing to work, then you might have already blown it. But as soon as you feel like you're that treading water feeling, that's what it feels like to me personally. I mean, that still happens to me sometimes. Sometimes there's a girl who's really hot and you open badly and you're just like, fuck, like she's talking to me, but it's going down quickly, so let me try really hard. Stop. Recognize that's a bad thought pattern. That doesn't work. And instead, play hard to get. Instead, challenge her, tease her, disqualify, break rapport. Stop putting the effort in. Stop talking to her so much. Like, make her talk more and make her invest in the interaction. It's the only solution. And lastly, this is probably the mistake I see most guys make. Projecting an incongruent image. Guys believe they need to take on an entirely new persona in order to get attraction. This isn't true. You need to pick an already proven way to express yourself that leads to an attractive stereotype. When guys believe they need to be someone they're not, or they don't realize that the behaviors that the teacher that's teaching them is recommending are incongruent with who they are as a person, it leads to 40-year-old IT guys dressing in Ed Hardy and trying to be 20-something club kids, which doesn't work and just makes you look desperate, and people laugh at you and tool you behind your back and sometimes to your face. So the whole act of adopting a new persona is to qualify yourself as a potential sex partner for a woman you previously thought was out of your league. This whole act is see-through. It's as obvious as wearing a t-shirt that says I'm attractive. Just because you bought some new clothes and you're trying to be someone you're not doesn't mean women aren't going to see through it. Doesn't mean that it's going to make you who you're trying to pretend to be. So it's really just bad news. Don't try to be someone you're not. You want to tweak who you are, fix some weak areas, but don't overhaul and 180 who you are as a person, because it probably won't work and you'll just come off as desperate, and like your whole personality is an attempt to qualify yourself as attractive. All right, let's recap. In this video, we rehashed why it's such a bad idea to qualify yourself. We also went over the 5 most common ways guys qualify themselves. They are explaining, don't explain, don't complain, take John Wooden's advice. Bragging, learn the difference between bragging and boasting. Boasting is all about how awesome you are and is bad. Bragging is a subtle way of displaying attractive traits. Number 3, overcompensating. You figure out where you have that weakness, or even self-perceived weakness, like some people said I was cooler than I thought I was. I probably wasn't, but wherever it is, find those weaknesses that you overcompensate for and tone that down. Number 4, trying too hard. Don't reward neutrality with more effort. Stop trying so hard. You can't just willpower your way through everything. And number 5, projecting an incongruent image. If you're projecting an incongruent image, stop right now. Throw away the Ed Hardy. Take off the too tight jeans. Stop trying to be 25 if you're 40. And start projecting an image that's attractive, that's more congruent with who you are. All right, exercise. Your exercise is to get out a blank sheet of paper and think up the last 10 examples of times you qualified yourself when talking to a woman you were attracted to. Should be pretty easy. Then I want you to rewrite the situation in a more positive way without you qualifying yourself. Think of what you could have done differently based on this video. Rewatch the video if you need to. All right, next week we're going to be introducing and going over hoop theory and its relationship with qualification. So we're moving into the second month of qualification. Now we're going to start getting into the specific mechanisms. We've talked about the inner game. Now we're going to move to the outer game, the specifics, the tactics and techniques for getting women to qualify themselves. See you then.